American Girl, Very Funny, Elizabeth, 1775. Written by Valerie Tripp, illustrations by Dan Anderson, vignettes by Susan McAlley. Chapter 1. The Merriest Girl in Virginia. Elizabeth Cole quickened her steps so that she was even farther ahead of her sister Annabel. It was a very cold, very clear December day. Elizabeth, in her sky blue cloak, looked like a brisk, busy bluebird as she hurried along the main street of Williamsburg. She just had to get to the Merriman's store before Annabel did. Elizabeth glanced over her shoulder and saw that she need not worry. Annabel was walking at a ladylike pace and lagging far behind her. Good, thought Elizabeth. Quick as a wink, she dashed up the steps to the Merriman's store. She opened the door and poked her head inside. Her very best friend, Felicity Merriman, was waiting. So close to the door that the girls practically bumped noses, which made them burst into giggles. Mr. Merriman smiled at Elizabeth and Felicity. "You two are the merriest girls in Virginia," he said. He bowed to Elizabeth and asked, "How are you today, Miss Elizabeth?" Elizabeth bobbed a curtsy, even though the part of her that was curtsying was still outside the door. "I'm very well, thank you, Mr. Merriman," she said politely. Mr. Merriman turned back to his work, and Elizabeth whispered to Felicity, "Annabel is coming. Is this a good day to play our joke?" "Aye," said Felicity. She tilted her head toward the back corner of the store where her father's apprentice, Ben, was up on a ladder, stocking shelves. Elizabeth glanced at Ben, and then he and Felicity shared a delighted grin. In some ways, Elizabeth and Felicity were different. Elizabeth was rather small for her age. Felicity was tall. Elizabeth had golden hair and a sunny, even temperament. She was good at thinking and planning, while Felicity rushed headlong into things and had a gingery temper to match her gingery red hair. Elizabeth came from a family of loyalists who believed that it was best for the King of England to rule the colonies. Felicity and her family thought some of the King's laws were unfair, so they were patriots. But in the ways that were really important, Elizabeth and Felicity were alike. They both loved to read. They both loved to be out of doors. They both loved animals. They both loved to laugh. And most of all, they both loved being best friends. Elizabeth ducked back outside and saw that Annabel had stopped at the edge of a slushy puddle made of yesterday's melted snow. Elizabeth watched her sister shudder with horror, lift her petticoat, and mince her way around the puddles as if they were a nest of snakes. Elizabeth waited patiently. She was used to waiting for Annabel. Even though Elizabeth was younger and smaller, she was much quicker than Annabel. Just as Elizabeth expected, when Annabel drew near, she scolded, "'Tis unladylike to walk so fast, Betsy." You are quite right," Elisabeth answered sweetly, though she did not like being called Bitsy any more than she liked being scolded. I should have walked slowly as you did. Elisabeth dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. I'm sure I look a sight. Hurrying in this cold weather has made my eyes red and runny, while your eyes look bright and clear. Annabel smiled and preened. She was a very pretty young lady, and especially proud of her big, beautiful brown eyes. Just the other day, a young man told me that the first thing he noticed were bright, clear eyes and good, sound teeth, said Elisabeth. She went on as if she were thinking aloud. Now, who told me that? Oh, yes, 'twas Ben. Ben? Repeated Annabel suddenly, very alert and interested. She adjusted her hat, smoothed her cloak, and marched past Elisabeth to Mr. Merriman's store. Elisabeth swallowed a laugh as she followed. She and Felicity knew very well that Annabel was smitten with Ben and was always eager for attention from him. The joke Elisabeth and Felicity had planned today depended upon the fact that Annabel was sweet on Ben. Annabel spotted Ben and aimed straight for him like an arrow shot from a bow. Good day, Miss Cole, said Mr. Merriman to Annabel as she flew by. May I help you? Annabel stopped and looked at Mr. Merriman with consideration. He was not the one she was interested in. Elisabeth and Felicity were worried, too. Their joke would not work if Mr. Merriman helped Annabel. Oh, no thank you, Mr. Merriman, said Annabel hastily. I beg you will not trouble yourself, sir. Ben can help me. Very well, said Mr. Merriman. He went to the storeroom. Elisabeth and Felicity sighed small sighs of relief. They pretended to be looking at whistles, but out of the corner of their eyes they watched Annabel. Ben! Said Annabel loudly. She startled poor Ben so much that he lurched, wobbled, and almost fell off the ladder. Ben turned, and Annabel smiled flirtatiously up at him. I'm here for ribbon, she said. Do help me. Ben climbed down the ladder and took his place behind the counter. Annabel leaned toward him and opened her eyes very wide. She asked, What color ribbon will look best with my eyes, do you think? Brown, said Ben. Oh, la, twittered Annabel, as if Ben had said something clever. But brown is not very festive, and the ribbons to trim my very best dress. The dress I'll be wearing if I am invited to any Christmas parties, concerts, dinners, balls. Annabel fluttered her eyelashes and smiled a smile that showed all her teeth as she said, significantly, Our weddings! Ben squinted at Annabel's toothy smile and fluttery eyes. Miss Cole, he said, are you quite well? Is there something in your eye? Do you have a toothache? Oh, la, Annabel said again, smiling even more toothy and fluttering her eyelashes even faster. I know you admire bright eyes and sound teeth. A little bird told me that they are the first things you notice. Elisabeth poked Felicity. Their joke was working. Ben looked puzzled. Bright eyes and sound teeth? He repeated. He thought for a moment, and then said, Well, yes, they are, Miss Cole, when I'm looking at a horse. A horse? Squawked Annabelle. Ben nodded. Elisabeth and Felicity covered their mouths to smolder their laughter, but one or two giggles sneaked out. Annabelle twirled around to face them. Her smile now sunk to a sour frown, her eyes now narrow and angry. You! She snarled at Elisabeth. You tricked me! And with that, Annabelle stamped her foot and stormed out of the store without another word. Befuddled Ben shrugged and climbed back up on the ladder. Elisabeth, Felicity said, Annabelle is annoyed. No doubt, said Elisabeth cheerfully, but it was well worth it. Elisabeth smiled widely and fluttered her eyelashes in imitation of Annabelle. She neighed softly like a very quiet horse. Felicity laughed and shook her head. I remember when you used to be afraid of Annabelle, she said. 'Twas you who taught me to stand up to Annabelle Bananabelle, Elisabeth replied. Mind, she still snips at me as much as ever, but I don't let her scolding bother me anymore. 'Tis just a part of her silliness, and now I know that it is more fun to laugh than to be afraid. You and I laugh, said Felicity, but doesn't Annabelle get angry at you when you tease her? Well, yes, said Elisabeth. Though, of course, I tense her only because I tease her only because she is my sister, and I love her, and I want to help her. To help her? Felicity asked. Indeed, yes, said Elisabeth. I tease Annabelle to show her how ridiculous she is acting. I know that underneath all of Annabelle's airs and silliness, she has a sense of humor and a sensible brain. I tease her to poke and prod her into being her true self. She will thank me someday. I don't think she is going to thank you today, Felicity said. In fact, I think you had better hurry along after her and try to calm her down before she gets home. You are quite right, said Elisabeth. I will see you tomorrow at lessons. The two friends bobbed happy curtsies, and then Elisabeth left. As she skipped down the steps outside the store, Elisabeth saw that Annabelle's annoyance seemed to have made her forget all about walking at a ladylike pace. Elisabeth had to trot to catch up to her sister. When she did, Annabelle snapped, Very funny, Elisabeth. You made me act like a ninny in front of Ben. Bright eyes and sound teeth. Ha! You knew perfectly well he was talking about horses. How could you? 'Twas only a joke, said Elisabeth. We meant it all in fun. A joke? Sputtered Annabelle. Now Ben thinks I'm a nincompoop. Elisabeth privately believed that Ben had always thought Annabelle was a nincompoop when he thought of her at all. But Elisabeth said soothingly, Now, Annabelle, 'twas only Ben. Ben comes from a very fine family in Yorktown, said Annabelle. I consider him an elegant beau. He fancies himself a patriot and says he's going to join the army when he finishes his apprenticeship, but I am sure that I could talk him out of that. Wrong-headed notion. In any case, I'm quite put out that now, thanks to you, he may never come courting. Courting? said Elisabeth. Now it was her turn to sputter. Annabel was always flirting, but Elisabeth thought flirtatiousness, like scolding, was just another part of her sister's silliness. You can't be serious, Annabel. It's not as if you are truly thinking of becoming engaged or getting married. You are but 16 years of age. Annabel stopped and faced Elisabeth. 16 is not too young to begin courting or even to marry. Indeed, if I wait too long, all the best gentlemen will be snapped up by other young ladies, she said, with a greedy glint in her eyes. My whole future happiness depends upon marrying well. I must be mistress of my own house. Finding a husband and making a good marriage is serious business. The sooner begun, the better. I'm glad I am only 10 years old, and marriage and men are no worry of mine yet, Elisabeth said. I would hate to change my life so greatly and to leave Mama and Father. I love our home and our life just the way they are here in Williamsburg. I want my life to stay the same forever. Snorted Annabel crossly. With your help and that of your fine friend Felicity, my life will stay the same forever too. I'll be stuck at home and die an old maid. The more she ranted, the more Annabel worked herself up into a lather. I won't stand for any more of your teasing, she said hotly. I am going to put a stop to it. I shall speak to Mama and tell her how you tricked me today. Come, Betsy. As she followed Annabel home, Elisabeth was not very worried. Annabel loved to tattle and told tales on Elisabeth nearly every day. In fact, Annabel's complaints came so fast and frequently that Elisabeth had noticed her parents hardly listened to them anymore. So Elisabeth calmly went with Annabel into the parlor where their mother and father were talking. And she calmly waited for Annabel to begin pouring out her disgruntlements. But Annabel did not have a chance to say a word. As soon as he saw the two girls making their curtsies, Mr. Cole said, "There you are. Come in. Make haste. Be seated. I should like to speak to you, Annabel." Her father spoke so very seriously that it sounded to Elisabeth as if Annabel was the one in trouble this time. Elisabeth, full of curiosity, sat on a stiff side chair and picked up her stitchery. She kept her eyes cast down on it, waiting eagerly to hear what father had to say. Even Annabel was quiet for a change. Mr. Cole seemed to be unsure how to begin. Ahem, he said, clearing his throat. What ails father? Thought Elisabeth. This dilly-dallying is unlike him. Annabel, my dear, said Mr. Cole at last, I have here a letter from the Honourable Miss Priscilla Lacey. Her father, Lord Hugh Lacey, was a friend of mine in England. I conduct some business for him, as you may recall. Annabel blurted out, Well, no, father, But Mr. Cole held up his hand to stop her. Now that he had begun to speak, he did not want to be interrupted. "Lord Hugh Lacy died a few years ago," he said. "His son Harry inherited his title and became Lord Harry. Miss Lacy has been running the estate and the household for Harry, who is much younger than she is. But Harry is now of an age to marry, and so Miss Lacy has written to me to suggest, that is, she asks." Mr. Cole cleared his throat, then came out with it all in a rush. Miss Lacy proposes that her brother should marry you." Elizabeth was so surprised that she pricked herself with the needle. "Me?" Annabel leaped to her feet and squeaked, "Yes, I will, Father! I will marry Lord Hugh and move to England, and gladly!" "Lord Harry," Mr. Cole corrected. "What? Oh, yes, of course," flubbered Annabel, bouncing. "Lord Larry. No, Lord Harry. Yes, I meant I'll marry Lord Harry. Of course." "Annabel, my child," said Mrs. Cole, "do stop to think, I beg you. Marrying is a serious decision a young woman makes. Remember that once you are married forever." Yes, Elizabeth piped up. "And England is very, very far away. And also, you don't know Lord Harry. Perhaps you will not like him." "Pish-posh," said Annabel. "He is a lord. I will be a lady. That is all I need to know." "Don't be hasty," said Mrs. Cole. "Marrying will mean the end of your youthful freedom, you now enjoy. When you have only your father and me to please, and yourself to amuse. A married woman, especially a lady married to such a man as Lord Harry, has many responsibilities. 'Twill not all be riding in fine carriages, wearing fancy gowns, and going to parties and balls. There will be a huge country house to be mistress of, with many servants to manage, and most likely another large house in London." "London!" Annabel explained ecstatically. She clapped her hands together and rose up on her toes in delight. Elizabeth could tell that her mother's sensible warnings, which were meant to bring Annabel down to earth, were having quite the opposite effect. Annabel wasn't thinking about how far away England was, or the many responsibilities of her new life would bring. She was thinking only about the romance and the prestige. Annabel gushed, "Oh, I want to marry Lord Harry as soon as possible." Mr. Cole looked at Mrs. Cole, who nodded slowly. Then Mr. Cole said, "Very well. I will send a positive answer to Miss Priscilla. She and Lord Harry are visiting relatives in New York just now. I will write and invite them to come here to Williamsburg straight away. We will work out the marriage contract and the details of the wedding then. We will announce the engagement on Christmastide, and the wedding will take place in February." On Saint Valentine's Day," swooned Annabel. "Oh, it will be so romantic." "As you wish," said Mr. Cole. "Then you'll sail to England in the spring. Well, I'll go now, and begin my letter to Miss Priscilla." He bowed. Elizabeth, Annabel, and Mrs. Cole curtsied as he left. Immediately, Annabel turned to her mother. "Oh, Mama!" she crowed. "Isn't it wonderful? I'm to be married! Aren't you pleased?" Mrs. Cole patted Annabel's hand. "I am pleased to see you so happy, my dear," she said, "and to know that you'll be safe in England. But I worry." "Gracious!" Annabel interrupting. "You mustn't waste time worrying, Mamma. There's so much to do. We must prepare for Lord Harry and Miss Priscilla. And I shall need a wedding dress and clothes for my new life as Lady Lacy." Annabel was floating with joy and gloating with satisfaction. "Just think, every young lady in Williamsburg will envy me when she hears the news. Oh, Mamma, we must have a big party at Christmas tide to announce the engagement. And I will be the center of attention. Our party must be that one that no one will ever forget." Elizabeth smiled down at her stitchery. She could not quite believe that Annabel Bananabel, was truly going to be engaged. But visitors from England and a party with Annabel as the belle of the ball, that truly sounded like a Christmas season full of opportunities for mischief making and fun for Elizabeth and Felicity, the merriest girls in Virginia. Chapter 2. Tarts for Tea. Tap, tap, tap. Elizabeth's shoes tapped Felicity's underneath the table. Thump. Felicity's foot softly thumped Elizabeth's foot in response. The foot signals were a method that Elizabeth and Felicity had invented to communicate secretly during lessons. They used the foot signals partly out of respect for their teacher, Miss Manderley. They liked her very much and never wanted to think that they weren't paying attention while she was teaching them, but mostly they used the foot signals to get around Annabel, who always poked her nosy little nose into their private conversations, and noticed that when they exchanged meaningful glances. Elizabeth's 3 gentle taps meant, "Let's tease Annabel." Felicity's gentle thump meant, "Yes." The two friends had strict rules about teasing Annabel. No lies. Nothing unkind or mean-spirited. Nothing that hurt, like a pinch or an insult. And only for a good reason. Today, for example, they were going to tease Annabel to help her stop sounding so snobbish. Only on the very finest lace. Only the very finest lace on my night shifts, of course, said Annabel, droning on and on to Miss Manderley. Nothing less will do for the wife of Lord Harry. Elizabeth thought that if she heard the name Lord Harry one more time, steam would come out of her ears, like the steam coming out of the spout of a tea kettle. All morning, Annabel had rattled on about marrying Lord Harry. The grand party to be held to announce that she was going to marry Lord Harry. All the frippery and finery she would shortly need because she was going to marry Lord Harry. And how important and a grand lady she would be after she did marry Lord Harry. Now, even though fragrant mint tea had been poured. Annabel was turned away from the table, showing Miss Manderley a piece of snowy white linen that her wedding night shifts and other new clothes were to be made of. For goodness sake, on and on and on, Annabel talked. Let the teasing begin, thought Elizabeth. Elizabeth saw Felicity slip a tart onto Annabel's plate, then another tart, then another tart, then another tart, then another. One tart on top of the other. Felicity hid another tart in the folds of Annabel's napkin. Elizabeth moved Annabel's teacup and saucer so that they were just behind Annabel's elbow. Then she filled the cup to the brim. Finally, Miss Manderley said, "Annabel, my dear, let us turn and drink our tea now before it grows cold." As Annabel turned to take her tea, her elbow knocked over her filled to the brim cup, and then toppled the teary tower of tarts on her plate so that they tumbled onto the tea table. "Oh, dear me," said Annabel. When she picked up her napkin to mop up the tea, a tart fell out and plopped on her lap. "Oh, dear me," said Annabel again, lifting the tart from her lap with her fingertips. "Look at this mess!" Elizabeth and Felicity hid their smiles behind their teacups and innocently drank their tea. Elizabeth thought she had detected a twinkle in Miss Manderley's eye, when the teacher chided Annabel gently, saying, "It is not good manners to put quite so many tarts onto one plate, Annabel." "I didn't!" protested Annabel. "'Twas those two!" She glared at Elizabeth and Felicity and opened her mouth as if she was about to speak angrily at them. But then she put her nose in the air and said in a superior voice, "The wife of Lord Harry must be well-mannered at all times." "Yes, indeed," said Miss Manderley. She stood. "I will go ask the maid to fetch us more tarts." The minute Miss Manderley left, Annabel gave Elizabeth and Felicity a condescending look. "You two are just jealous," she said. "Not at all," Elizabeth said. "We think it's suspicious that Miss Lacey has had to come all the way to Virginia to find a wife for her brother. There must be some reason why no young lady in England will marry Lord Harry." "That's right," said Felicity. "We'd never marry a silly lord we'd never met. He may be just terrible. He may be dull and boring or gloomy." "Yes," joked Elizabeth. "Lord Harry may not be very merry. And who knows what he looks like? Lord Harry may look scary and be very, very hairy." Elizabeth and Elizabeth snickered. Annabel ignored the joke. "I am sure Lord Harry is a perfect gentleman," she said. "After all, he is a lord, which means he is a nobleman. Being a nobleman doesn't mean he is a noble person," said Elizabeth. Having a title like lord or lady may be important in England, but I have noticed that here in the colonies people think for themselves and they respect people for what they do. Here people are considered noble if they act nobly." Annabel flickered her fingers as if Elizabeth's ideas were no more than a pesky fly. "You're just parroting, Felicity. your patriot friend, she sniffed. Perhaps, said Elisabeth. But I like the way it is here, where people are independent and can work hard and make their lives better. People prove their worthiness. I respect they earn has nothing to do with their names. The respect they earn has nothing to do with their names. I pray you will not spout such nonsense about independence and lack of respect for nobility in front of Lord Harry and Miss Priscilla, said Annabel. They'd be shocked to see that we have a little patriot in our family. Besides, Bitsy, you're just too young to understand. You will feel differently when you are older. Indeed, both of you are uncivilized brats. Both of you two uncivilized brats will feel differently as soon as I am married. And you see the respect my new position brings me. No. Elisabeth began heatedly. We, young ladies, said Miss Manderley from the doorway. That will do. All three girls sat up straight and silented. Annabel, said Miss Manderley, I think you know better than to refer to your sister and her friend as uncivilized brats. Annabel fused. But, she began. Miss Manderley came to the table and put her hand atop Annabel's to stop her from talking. It soon became apparent that Miss Manderley had overheard a great deal of the girls' argument. She turned to Felicity and Elisabeth and said, Annabel is quite right. Her intended Lord Lacy is a nobleman, and as such he is a very desirable husband. Annabel is fortunate to have an offer of marriage from him. If he is a good and decent man, every young lady must envy her that good fortune. Do you understand, young ladies? Yes, ma'am, said Elisabeth and Felicity together. Then Miss Manderley spoke to Annabel in a serious voice. Marriage is a choice, Annabel, Miss Manderley said. It is not the only road to happiness for a woman, or the easiest road, either. Especially here in the colonies, it is possible for a woman to stand on her own 2 feet and make an independent life for herself that is full and satisfying, as I have. A nobleman's wife you will not have. As a nobleman's wife, you will not have that independence. There will be many strict rules of behavior and etiquette you will be expected to follow. You will have many duties and responsibilities. And Annabel began to look solemn. She perked up when Miss Manderley said, However, you will be entitled to the privilege, respect, and admiration accorded those ladies in the very highest ranks of society, if you handle your position as the wife of Lord Harry well. Annabel tossed her head, squared her shoulders, and smirked. She looked pleased at the way Miss Manderley made it sound, as if she had won a great and rare prize in Lord Harry. Neither Felicity nor Elisabeth said a word, but under the table their feet banged into one another. Clonk. That was the secret foot signal that meant annoy Annabel. Annabel Bananabel is so annoying. All afternoon on The day that Lord Harry and Miss Priscilla were expected, Elizabeth teased Annabel. Every time a carriage passed by outside the bedchamber where the sisters were waiting, Elizabeth would fly to the window and gasp, "Is that the Lacey's carriage?" Annabel would leap from her seat as if a spring had sprung beneath her, yanked out the rags that were curling her side curls, and fly downstairs to the entrance hall in order to be in place when the front door opened. Of course, the carriage never was the Lacey's. After 5 false alarms, 5 mad rushes down the stairs, 5 out of breath trudges back up, and 5 retying of the curling rags, Annabel was hot and cross. She plunged herself down in her chair and announced, "You will not fool me again, Bitsy." Elizabeth sat quietly for a minute or two. Then she cocked her ear toward the window. Yet again. "I hear a carriage," she said. She went to the window. "I think it really is the Lacey's this time." "I think it really is the Lacey's this time. A small lady and a tall man are coming to our front door. Come look, Annabel." "No," said Annabel. "This is just more of your nonsense, Elizabeth. Say what you like. I am not going to move." Suddenly the chamber door burst open and Mrs. Cole appeared. "Annabel!" she said. "Come downstairs immediately. The Laceys have arrived. Make haste, dear child. You too, Elizabeth, my love." Annabel shot up out of her chair with a howl and stumbled over her own feet in a hurry to follow her mother out the door and down the stairs to the entresol. She yanked the curling rags from her hair as she ran. Elizabeth was so close behind, she did not want to miss a moment. Mr. Cole was waiting in the hall with their guests. Elizabeth saw that Miss Priscilla Lacey was tiny and wore her hair in very tightly wound curls that quivered constantly. Excuse me. As if they were indignant. She had a very sharp, pointed nose and very sharp brown eyes. Lord Harry Lacey, by contrast, was a young giant. He had long arms, big hands, and a big, beaky nose. His eyebrows were as thick as caterpillars, and they were raised up, which made him look surprised and a bit confused as to where he was and why he was there. Mr. Cole made polite instructions. "Lord Harry, Miss Lacey," he said, "permit me to introduce my wife, Mrs. Cole, and my daughters, Annabel and Elizabeth." "Welcome," said Mrs. Cole graciously. All the ladies curtsied, and Mr. Cole bowed. Annabel's curtsy was a bit wobbly because she was smiling up at Lord Harry, who blushed. Miss Priscilla waggled her head at him to remind him to bow. "Oh, right. Oh, Prissy," said Harry. Lord Harry said, as he bent in a bungled bow. "Well," said Mrs. Cole brightly, "shall we go to the parlor for tea?" She turned to lead the way. Lord Harry boomed, "Right, oh," with so much enthusiasm that Miss Priscilla winced. He galloped into the parlor eagerly. Poor Lord Harry. Elizabeth felt sorry for him as tea was served. His teacup looked like a thimble in his giant hand. He was too big for his chair. He looked like a horse who'd been asked into the parlor. He had just plopped a whole biscuit into his mouth when Mr. Cole made matters worse by turning everyone's attention to him. "Lord Harry," said Mr. Cole, "here in Virginia the conflict between the Loyalists and Patriots is becoming more serious and dangerous every day. The royal governor and his family have had to abandon their palace and leave Williamsburg. You have just come from New York. What do you think of the situation there?" At the word "think," Lord Harry's eyebrows shot up in alarm, and he looked nervously at his sister. Elizabeth could see that Lord Harry was uncomfortable being asked what he thought. She guessed that he was used to being told by his sister what he thought. And indeed, while Lord Harry was still munching, Miss Priscilla spoke for him. "Dreadful," said Miss Priscilla crisply. "Righto, Prissy," mumbled Lord Harry around the biscuit in his mouth. "Have another biscuit," Mrs. Cole said to him kindly. Then she and Mr. Cole took pity on Lord Harry and began a lively conversation that did not require any participation from him. Miss Priscilla turned to Annabel, who was seated next to her, and took hold of both of her hands. "You are an enchanting child, Arabelle," Miss Priscilla said. "Harry is fortunate indeed." Annabel sneaked a peek at Lord Harry and glowed. She was too pleased to correct Miss Priscilla's mispronunciation of her name. "I'll take you under my wing," Miss Priscilla went on to Annabel. "After all, you are my future sister-in-law. I'll teach you how ladies and gentlemen behave in the very highest level of society, so that you won't be embarrassed when we are back in England." "How kind of you!" gushed Annabel, who did not understand that she had just been insulted. Manners here in the colonies are shocking." She tilted her head toward Elizabeth and sighed. "Mamma and I try to set a good example, and Bitsy and I do take lessons with a gentlewoman, but Bitsy has picked up some horridly rough manners from her colonial friend Felicity." "Oh, you poor dear Susabelle," said Miss Priscilla. "How terrible for you to be ashamed of your little sister's manners." "Indeed, yes," said Annabel. She shot a self-satisfied smile over her shoulder at Elizabeth. Elizabeth batted her eyelashes and smiled a pretend smile back. Susabelle, indeed. Elizabeth suspected that Miss Priscilla knew perfectly well that Annabel's name was Annabel. It seemed almost as if Miss Priscilla had deliberately used the wrong name to show that she was so superior. She did not need to remember what sort of belle the elder Miss Cole was. Now Miss Priscilla spoke up to get Mrs. Cole Cole's attention. "My dear Mrs. Cole," Miss Priscilla said, "it's all decided. I am going to make a pet of your darling elder daughter. I shall give her guidance and advice to prepare her for her life in England." Then Miss Priscilla turned her pinpoint eyes on Elisabeth. "Shall I teach you too, little one?" she asked. Everyone waited for Elisabeth to answer. At first Elisabeth wanted to say, "No, thank you. I'm not the one who's going to marry a poor harried Lord Harry and move to England. Thank goodness. Besides, my manners are just fine." But then Elisabeth had a thought. How could she say no to such a wonderful opportunity to annoy Annabel, who surely did not want to share Miss Priscilla's attention with her? And so Elisabeth answered Miss Priscilla with enthusiasm. "Oh, yes, please," she said. "Do teach me along with Annabel." Miss Priscilla beamed. "You see, Mrs. Cole, how enthusiastic little one is," she said. "It is the wish of her heart to be instructed by me, along with her sister. May I have your permission to do so?" "Yes, indeed," said Mrs. Cole. "Thank you." "Yes, thank you, Miss Priscilla," said Elisabeth. She was pleased to see Annabel's smile slide down into a frown. Elisabeth held a plate out to Annabel and said impishly, "Look, Annabel, tarts for tea, your favorites. Mind you don't take too many." Chapter 3. Miss Pris. The very next morning, Miss Priscilla began instructing Annabel and Elisabeth in the ways aristocratic ladies behaved in England. When the sisters came to breakfast, Miss Priscilla sang out, "Dorabelle and little one, you are wearing such sweet dresses. I had one in that style long ago, when it was fashionable. It makes me feel quite young to see that style again. But of course in England, a lady in the highest circle of society must always look fashionable and up to date, not dowdy as a milkmaid." Annabel nodded, wide-eyed. She accepted Miss Priscilla's instructive comment as if it were a precious jewel of wisdom. But Elisabeth saw that the comment was nothing more than a criticism disguised as a compliment. When the girls sat at the table, Miss Priscilla smiled and said, "I am amused by your hair, Clarabelle. And yours too, little one. You look like dear little curly-haired lambs. Of course, ladies in England would never be seen with even one hair out of place." Annabel had taken extra trouble that morning to fix her hair in an elaborate manner in order to impress Miss Priscilla, but now she sheepishly pulled her cap down to cover her curls and nudged Elisabeth to do the same. Elisabeth ignored her and served herself some breakfast ham. As the girls ate, Miss Priscilla laughed and tinkled. Mirthless laugh. She said, "Isabel and little one, I do admire your healthy appetites. You eat a tremendous amount. Of course, ladies in England are delicate and considered to be impolite to eat so heartily." Annabel's cheeks pinked to the color of the ham on her plate. and she put her fork down quickly. Elisabeth continued chewing. She was beginning to regret having agreed to be included in Miss Priscilla's aristocratic lady lessons, and their very first breakfast together was not even over. As the days went on, Elisabeth grew more and more regretting being included. She grew tired of being told day after day how things were done in England. She grew tired of being with Miss Priscilla from morning till night, too. They hardly ever saw Lord Harry. Whenever he blumbered into a room where Miss Priscilla was seated with Annabel and Elisabeth, he stopped short. He blushed shyly at Annabel. Take one look at his sister's impatient eyes and irritated curls, then skitter away as quickly as possible. Elizabeth understood why. Miss Priscilla's sharp, pointed eyes found faults in him too, which she pointed out with sharp, pointed comments. So Lord Harry spent most of his days following Mr. Cole around like a faithful dog, or meandering around Williamsburg. One day, Elizabeth saw him standing with Ben, looking at the horses in the neighbor's paddock, except at tea and dinner, where he never said a word because his sister always spoke for him. Elisabeth and Annabel saw Lord Harry very rarely. At last an afternoon came when Elizabeth could slip away. Annabel and Miss Priscilla were going to the miller's shop to choose a new stomacher for Annabel's best dress. Annabel, who was very particular about her appearance, stood at the mirror by the front door, and adjusted the bow on her hat over and over again. Just when she was finally satisfied, Miss Priscilla looked at the bow, shivered with distaste, and retied it for her. "You mustn't look like a country mouse when you're out in public, Minnabel," she said. "Even in such an insignificant town as this. I pray you will try to look your best on the evening of the engagement party. Your mother and I have invited people from only the very highest circle of society, and it would not do to be embarrassed in front of them." She sighed, and added haughtily, "Of course, thanks to those dreadful hot-headed patriots, there are not many loyalists left here in Williamsburg." She frowned, tilted Annabel's hat, then said, "Come along now." As soon as Miss Priscilla and Annabel were out the door, Elizabeth rushed to Felicity's house and told her woes to her friend. "Miss Priscilla's idea of instructing Annabel and me is to tell us everything we're doing wrong, which seems to be everything that we do," Elizabeth said to Felicity. "According to her, Annabel and I don't dress, stand, walk, talk, sit, eat, drink, or breathe the way aristocratic ladies do in England. All I can say is that those ladies in England must be miserable. They have so many rules to follow. I'm very glad that I am not moving to England." "I'm glad too," said Felicity, smiling at her friend. "Does Annabel really want to marry Lord Harry?" "Seems so," says Elizabeth, "though she still does not really know him at all. They are never allowed to be alone together. If Lord Harry ever does happen to run into Annabel and me, Annabel smiles at him, he blushes shyly at her, and then he scurries off. When the whole family is gathered for tea and dinner, he only ever says one thing. Elisabeth pretended to be Lord Harry and said in a deep voice, "Righto!" The girls giggled. "At least he sounds agreeable," said Felicity. "Do you think he's nice?" "Yes, I do," Elisabeth said, "and I think you would too, Felicity. He is rather a tongue-tied, clumsy blunder when his sister is round, but that's just because she makes him so very nervous. He seems to be happiest out of doors, and he's very at ease with dogs and horses. He's sort of like a horse himself." "Then I would certainly like him," said Felicity, who adores horses. "I do like Lord Harry," said Elisabeth, "but I'd think more highly of him if he didn't let his sister bully him as she does." He sighed. "Miss Priscilla is so very tiresome. I dread the time I spend with her, and Annabel makes it worse. First she puts on hoity-toity airs, trying to impress Miss Priscilla. Then, when Miss Priscilla criticizes her, Annabel just accepts it. I wish I knew a way to shake Annabel awake and poke and prod her into seeing how ridiculous she's acting, and how silly she is to let Miss Pris bully her, too." Felicity smiled slyly. "Oh," she said lightly, "I think you do know a way to poke and prod Annabel." Elisabeth grinned gleefully because underneath the table, Felicity's toes were tapping hers. Tap, tap, tap. Elisabeth did her best, consistently every morning at breakfast. For the next 3 days, Elisabeth teased Annabel and tried and true tricks that she and Annabel had invented to torment Annabel even more. Elisabeth acted like a prim, proper, perfect little Miss Pris herself. The first day, Elisabeth put salt in Annabel's tea instead of sugar, which made Annabel turn very red in the face and rush from the room, coughing and spluttering. "Gracious, Sarabel!" Miss Priscilla called out after Annabel. "Ladies in England never gulp their tea. They never run out of the room without making a proper curtsy." "Tisk, tisk, tisk." Annabel tisked. She sipped her tea and slowly and carefully. On the second day, Elisabeth secretly slipped a little bit of icicle down the back of Annabel's dress, which made Annabel leap up from her chair, and run from the room squealing. "Gracious, Corabel!" Miss Priscilla called out after her. "Ladies in England never whoop, and, as I told you before, they never run out of a room without making a proper curtsy." Elisabeth shook her head sadly and silently. She sat straight and still in her chair. On the third day, Elisabeth hid a live spider in among Annabel's slices of toast, which made Annabel shriek in terror and push the plate away with such force that it knocked over a bowl of prunes in gooey juice and spilled the prunes and the juice all over the table. Then Annabel ran from the room howling. "Gracious, Florabel!" Miss Priscilla called out after her. "Ladies in England never knock things over. And must I tell you again that a lady never runs out of the room without making a proper curtsy?" Elisabeth sighed quietly and lifted her toast with dainty fingers. The fourth day was the day of the party to announce Annabel's engagement to Lord Harry. Elisabeth had planned to try the Tiare Tower of Tarts trick again, but she decided not to at the last minute because her mother and father had joined them at breakfast, which was most unusual, and as it turns out, dreadful for Elisabeth. "I am here to give you good news, Elisabeth," said Mr. Cole. "Miss Priscilla has most generously offered to take you along when she and Lord Harry and Annabel sail for England. Your mother and I have agreed. Miss Priscilla herself will announce this additional news at the engagement party tonight." Elisabeth gasped. She was stunned speechless. Her heart beat so fast. Her face flushed red. Her jaw fell open. She was going to England too? It was the most horrifying idea she had ever heard. "I can see that you are as amazed as at the great generosity of Miss Priscilla's invitation as we are," Mr. Cole went on. "You understand that the move to England will be very adventurous for you. You will be lifted into a higher level of society than we enjoy here in Virginia, which means that you will have better prospects for marriage eventually, and meanwhile better education and training to be a lady." In desperation, Elisabeth turned to her mother, but before she could say a word, Mrs. Cole said gently, "Your father and I have been trying to find a way to remove both you and Annabel from the dangerous political situation here in the colonies. Elisabeth, my love, the future grows more uncertain for us loyalists in Virginia every day." "Yes, indeed," Miss Priscilla cut in. "We must take you away from these wild, uncivilized, patriot hotheads." Mrs. Cole smiled sadly at Elisabeth. "We will be broken-hearted to part with you, dear Elisabeth," she said, "but we are thinking of your future and of your safety, and it will comfort us to know that you and Annabel will be together." Good manners prevented Elisabeth from shouting, "No, I don't want to go!" She swallowed hard, then said in a shaky voice, "Mama, Father, with all respect, I beg you to believe me when I say that I do not want to go," Annabel added. "And I don't want her to either. She's a minx and a mischief maker." But no one paid any attention to Annabel. "Ha, ha, ha!" Miss Priscilla laughed gratingly. "We all know that you do want to come to England, little one. Did you not beg to be included in my instructions about how to behave in England? And for the past 3 days at breakfast your manners have been impeccable. You will fit into you'll fit into aristocratic society perfectly. You have not gulped your tea, whooped, or spilled the prunes. You have never run out of the room without making a proper curtsy, which, as you know, your sister has done over and over again, despite my constant reminders." "But I made Annabel do those things," said Annabel. "I played tricks on her." Annabel whirled to face Miss Priscilla. "That is what I have been trying to tell you," she said with exasperation. Miss Priscilla just laughed again. "It It is kind of you to try to excuse your sister's mistakes, little one, she said, but you need not, and don't worry. I will keep a close eye on her in England so that she won't make such errors there. I'll keep an eye on you, too. She fixed Elisabeth with a steely stare and added, as long as you and your sister follow my guidance, all will be well. Life in England with Miss Priss sounded like prison to Elisabeth. Miss Priscilla, Mama, Father, Elisabeth pleaded, please believe me, I'm not proper enough to go to England. I truly did trick Annabel into acting so rudely. She did! Ranted Annabel. Elisabeth, Mrs. Cole began. But Miss Priscilla interrupted. You couldn't possibly be clever enough to plan such pranks, little one, she said condescendingly. But oh, how you do amuse me. We'll have great fun in England. You are very funny, Elisabeth. No! Exclaimed Felicity when Elisabeth told her the terrible news. The two friends were together at Elisabeth's house. It was just a few hours before the engagement party, and Felicity had come over to see Elisabeth in her beautiful new pink gown. Do your parents truly want you to go to England? Elisabeth spoke slowly. It seems so, she said. They say it will be adventurous for me, and that it will be safer there. Oh, exclaimed Felicity in exacerbation. Safer! 'Tis so unfair when grown-ups. Disagreements ruin everything for their children. We did not start this fight between loyalists and patriots, but we have to suffer for it. I will be miserable if you go to England, and you will be too. Aye, Elisabeth agreed wholeheartedly, especially because I will be under Miss Priss's thumb. Why does she want you to go? Said Felicity. To have someone else to bully? Said Elisabeth. You can't go with her, said Felicity wildly. You must run away, or perhaps you could paint dots on yourself and pretend to have the pox. That would scare her. Or you could secretly practice rowing between now and the wedding. And then, when you are on the ship for England, you could steal a smaller boat, jump overboard onto it, and row ashore. Or you and I could both cut off our hair and dress as boys and run off to the western wilderness together. Or we could join up with pirates or Felicity. Elisabeth interrupted gently. Your ideas are not very practical. I'm afraid. We must think carefully. We need a good plan. And we need it quickly. We don't have much time. At the party, Miss Priscilla is going to announce that I am going to England. Once her announcement has been made in front of all my parents' friends, my parents will feel honor-bound to hold to their agreement with Miss Priscilla. So we must make Miss Priscilla change her mind about me before she can make the announcement. We've got to convince her that she wants to take Annabel to England, but not me. Felicity's face lit up with an idea. You could behave very strangely at the party tonight, She said, "You could whoop and shriek and knock things over and run about madly like a crackpate. Elisabeth giggled, but then she said, "I'm afraid that would not change Miss Priscilla's mind. She has already seen Annabel do all those things and more at breakfast over these last few days, and she is still taking her back to England." "Oh," said Felicity. She smiled a little at the thought of what breakfast with Annabel Bananabel must have been like these past few days. Elisabeth spoke thoughtfully. "I think Miss Priscilla is pleased when we behave badly because it proves that she's right, that everyone here in the colonies is an uncivilized hothead," Elisabeth said. Felicity shook her head, frowning. "We are not uncivilized," she said, "and no one is a hothead, except maybe Ben, about being a patriot. Miss Priscilla is wrong. She's sure she's right about that and everything else," said Elisabeth. "She enjoys fusing at Annabel and me and telling us what we do not know the right way to act or speak or even how to dress properly, the way aristocratic ladies do in England. Of course she thinks that the way she does everything is perfect, and that the way she dresses is the height of fashion. You should see the ridiculous wig she is going to wear tonight. She brought it with her all the way from England. She is very proud of showing it off in front of all the fancy people at the party. She's very vain about it. The wig is as tall as I am. Come, I'll show you." Elisabeth and Felicity tiptoed up the steps and into the room where the wigs were powdered. "Look," said Elisabeth. She pointed to a wig that was so tall and so heavily dusted with white powder that it looked like one of the drifts of snow outside the window. Swoops and swirls of curls wrapped around the wig and hung down from it, with bunches of flowers and ribbons and bows peeking out from among the curls. "My!" said Felicity. "It looks so big and heavy. Your head will be awfully warm under that thing, under that wig." "Aye," joked Elisabeth. "'Tis Miss Pris who'll be a hothead tonight." The two friends giggled. Then Elisabeth looked at Felicity with a sparkle in her eyes. "Perhaps we should fix the wig to help Miss Priscilla keep a cool head." "How?" asked Felicity. Without another word, Elisabeth opened the window. She scooped a handful of snow off the windowsill and packed it into a small, hard snowball. Then she very carefully wriggled her hand into the hair of the wig and hid the snowball in among the snowy white curls. Felicity caught on right away and made a few small snowballs to hide in Miss Priscilla's wig too. Then Elisabeth put the wig next to the open window so that it would stay very cold until Miss Priscilla put it on. When they were finished, the two girls scampered back downstairs and collapsed against one another, weak with laughter. "When the snowballs melt, they'll cool Miss Priscilla's head," said Elisabeth cheerfully. "I think they'll also cool her feelings toward me when she finds out that I am responsible for them." "Aye," laughed Felicity. "That will throw cold water on her plans." Ooh, nice one. Chapter 4. Hotheads. Elisabeth had never seen her house look as elegant as it did for the party. Light from dozens of candles made the rooms glow. The light flickered and danced on the ceiling and walls, seemingly to keep time with the music and musicians were playing in the parlor. Sprigs of holly and ivy tied with red ribbons hung at the windows, and garlands of holly and ivy were looped over the doorways on the musicians' music stands and along the dining room table. The table itself was covered with silver, crystals, and china dishes, so fine that they were pearly and translucent. Even the food was beautiful. Golden pears, sweet meats, iced cakes, nuts, and candy figs were piled high in pyramids in the parlor. All the furniture had been pushed against the walls to make space for dancing. The rugs had been removed and the floor had been polished until it was gleaming. Annabelle danced past Mr. Cole, and Elisabeth had to admit that her sister looked lovely. Annabelle's dress, made of pale yellow silk trimmed with lace, was as pretty as a snowflake. Annabelle truly was the belle of the ball. She stepped lightly, turned, curtsied, and twirled gracefully as she danced. In fact, all but two of the dancers moved so effortlessly across the shiny floor that they seemed to be skating on smooth ice. Elisabeth watched as two awkward dancers, Miss Priscilla and Lord Harry, very closely. They made rather a mismatched couple because Lord Lady was so much taller than his sister. Elisabeth did not see how they could possibly speak to one another. Miss Priscilla was nose to button with Lord Harry's silver coat buttons, and Lord Harry's nose was a danger of being lost in Miss Priscilla's towering wig. Lord Harry looked too worried to speak anyway. His eyebrows were frightened high, and he doggedly steered his sister around the dance floor, as if she were an ox he was backing into the harness of a plot. Miss Priscilla was too puffed with pride in herself and her wig to notice how gracelessly she and her partner were dancing. She had a snooty, snobbish expression on her face underneath her snowbank of hair. Elisabeth stared at the snowbank particularly. She was worried. Surely the room was warm enough. Why weren't the snowballs melting? Oh, she wished they'd hurry. At any moment her mother might come into the parlor from the entry hall where she was greeting the guests. When Mr. Cole would stop the music and announce Annabelle and Lord Harry's engagement, and Miss Priscilla would tell everyone that Elisabeth was going to England, too. Once she did, Elisabeth would have to go. Then, suddenly, blink! Elisabeth saw a droplet of water fly out from Miss Priscilla's wig and land on the floor. Blink, blink, blink! 3 more droplets flew from the wig, sparkling as they caught the light, then plopped onto the floor. More droplets hit Lord Harry's coat sleeve and left splotchy spots. The top of Miss Priscilla's wig began to look like the icing on a Christmas cake, as water from the snowball from the melting snowballs mixed with the white powder and made a sticky paste. Because the wig was so high, Miss Priscilla herself did not see or feel the droplets, though soon they sprayed freely from her wig as she bumpily turned and twirled, leaving a trail of tiny puddles and a trail of startled, water-splattered dancers behind her as she passed. When a cold, wet glob landed on Annabel, she squealed, "Eek!" "What's the matter? What's the matter?" cried Mr. Cole, who was her dancing partner. He stopped dancing, and the music stopped too. Elisabeth held her breath as the room fell silent. All the guests turned to look at Annabel. When they saw that she was pointing a shaky finger at Miss Priscilla's head, they all started to stare at Miss Priscilla. It seemed to Elisabeth that at first Miss Priscilla did not understand what was going on. It was not until she had stood still for a moment that the water drop slid from her wig down the center of her forehead and out to the tip of her nose. It hung there like a pearl drop, then fell to the floor with a plop. Miss Priscilla looked around her feet and saw that she was encircled by drops of water that had fallen and were still merrily dripping from her wig. "Oh, my!" Miss Priscilla whimpered. She clutched her wig with both hands and hurried from the room, leaving a shimmery trail of water droplets behind her like a mirror on the floor. Elisabeth spoke in a whisper that only Annabel besides her could hear. "Gracious, Prisabel," she said, "ladies in England never whimper, and surely you, of all people, must know that they never run out of a room without making a proper curtsy." Annabel gasped and turned sharply towards Elisabeth. Elisabeth could tell by the look in her eyes that Annabel knew who made Miss Priscilla's wig melt. For one moment Annabel looked alarmed, and a very odd expression came across her face. It was just the tiniest hint of a smile. At a signal from Mr. Cole, the music started up again, and most of the dancers went back to their dancing. Mrs. Cole hurried toward Mr. Cole and the girls who were standing with Lord Harry. "Miss Priscilla just rushed past me and up the stairs to her chamber," said Mrs. Cole. "Has she taken ill?" "I believe Miss Priscilla felt a sudden chill," said Felicity solemnly. Annabel covered her mouth with her hand and made a choking sound. "Do not be distressed, my love," Mrs. Cole said to Annabel. "Miss Priscilla will recover, I am sure, and may return when she has fetched a wrap. Why don't you dance with Lord Harry for a while? It is getting late, and your father is about to announce your engagement to our guests. We shall have to postpone Miss Priscilla's additional news about Elisabeth going to England, however, as Miss Priscilla most particularly wanted to announce that herself. 'Tis a pity indeed." Elisabeth and Annabel looked at one another, eye to eye. Then at the same time, they both said, "Indeed." Miss Priscilla, without her wig, was waiting in the upper hallway for her brother and the Coles. When they came upstairs after the guests had departed, Elisabeth could tell that from her pinched face and piercing look that Miss Priscilla was not pleased. "Oh, my dear Miss Priscilla," said Mrs. Cole, "I am so sorry that you left the party. You missed the announcement of Annabel and Lord Harry's engagement." But Annabelle, but Elisabeth explained that you felt a sudden chill. It is not a head cold coming on, I hope. Miss Priscilla's face pinched even more. My wig, she said in an icy tone, was full of snow. Snow? Asked Mr. and Mrs. Cole together. Yes, said Miss Priscilla. And I know who put it there. She turned to Elisabeth. You minx! You scamp! You mischievous imp! You did play all those tricks on your sister, and tonight you played one on me, she said. I've been sorely mistaken in you. I thought you'd be as easy to control as your silly sister, but now I see you for the trickster that you are. You really are. I beg your pardon, Miss Priscilla, exclaimed Mrs. Cole. She stood behind Elisabeth and Annabelle protectively. What are you saying about my daughters? What's this? Sputtered Mr. Cole. Elisabeth, am I to understand that you put snow in Miss Priscilla's wig? Yes, father, said Elisabeth simply. But why? Asked Mr. and Mrs. Cole together. I had to prove to her, and to you too as well, that I am not proper enough to go to England, said Elisabeth. Proper? Barked Miss Priscilla. You're a rude, rambunctious jackanapes! I would no more take you back to England with us than I'd take a wild monkey. You are no longer invited. Oh, thank you, said Elisabeth sincerely, softly, and sweetly, for I do not wish to go. Lord Harry surprised them all by cheering. Right-o, Miss Elisabeth. Oh, do be quiet, Harry, said Miss Priscilla. No, said Lord Harry. This time you won't stop me, Prissy. I have something important to say. I'm going to say it, and you're going to listen. Everyone stared at Lord Harry in astonishment. Lord Harry blushed very red, but his eyebrows were set in firm, stern, straight line. Prissy, you usually don't listen to me, so I gave up trying to talk about what I wanted long ago, he said. But while I've been here, I've made a friend. He's a fine fellow, and we've had good conversations about what we want to do with in our future. I met him while looking at horses. His name is Ben. Ben? Annabelle squeaking a little. Mr. Merriman's apprentice? That's the fellow, said Lord Harry. Ben has great horse sense. He taught me the first things to look for in a horse are bright, clear eyes and good teeth. Elisabeth chuckled. She smiled toothedly and batted her eyelashes at Annabelle, who flushed. Ben and I agree about horses, said Lord Harry. And even though we don't agree about the king, we do agree that a person has to fight for what he thinks is right. So, Ben's joining the Patriot Army as soon as he can, and I've decided to join the king's army as soon as I can. No! Snapped Miss Priscilla, but Lord Harry ignored her. Annabelle, Lord Harry said, you're a grand girl, and very pretty too, but I don't want to marry you. I don't want to marry anyone, at all. Not for a while, anyway. Not until after I've been a soldier.
marrying you was all Prissy's idea. And I went along because Prissy is Prissy. I am sorry. I should have spoken to you about this before your father announced our engagement. But I didn't have the courage to stand up to Prissy until I saw Miss Elisabeth do it tonight. I hope you will forgive me for breaking our engagement.
I do forgive you! Exclaimed Annabel, bouncing happily. You are a nice young man, Lord Harry. But though I might be able to live happily with you, I could never live happily with your sister. Truth is, I don't want to marry you either.
I'm glad to hear it, said Lord Harry, shaking Annabel's hand heartily.
Miss Priscilla snorted at Annabel. You know that you never would have been worthy of the respect due to the name Lady Lacy anyway.
Elisabeth expected Annabel to be crushed,
but instead, Annabel did a very surprising thing. She put her arm around Elisabeth's shoulder and said firmly, I beg your pardon, Miss Priscilla, but what I know is that my name is just plain Annabel Cole, and my sister Elisabeth has helped me see that there's nothing wrong with that, or with being who I truly am. I'd rather have people respect me for what I do than what my name is.
Annabel grinned at Elisabeth. Then she said, And I have become much too independent-minded to allow anyone to tell me what to do every moment of the day. I guess I had better stay here in the colonies, where people are proud of thinking for themselves.
Elisabeth grinned back at Annabel, but she stopped grinning when she saw the grim expressions on her parents' faces.
Elisabeth, said Mrs. Cole in a serious voice, Miss Lacy is our honored guest. You are very wrong to have played such a childish trick on her. I, said Mr. Cole, apologize at once.
Yes, sir, said Elisabeth. She turned to Miss Priscilla and said, I beg you will forgive me, Miss Priscilla.
Snorted Miss Priscilla, just as angrily as ever. I wash my hands of the lot of you. Lord Harry and I will leave tomorrow at daybreak. Come along now, Harry. Lord Harry bowed, smiled at Mr. and Mrs. Cole, and winked at Annabel and Elisabeth.
His caterpillar eyebrows had never looked so happy. Then he turned and followed Miss Priscilla, who was so angry that she had stormed off to her room without making a proper curtsy.
Annabel, said Elisabeth, when the Lacys were gone, are you quite sure you don't want to be Lady Lacy? Annabel laughed. I am sure, she said. Thank you, Elisabeth, for making me realize it. Mrs. Cole shook her head. What am I supposed to do with two such daughters? She asked. I suppose it is a good thing that you will both be near me, where I can keep an eye on you. She smiled a little and said, Indeed, I must admit that it would have broken my heart to see you go so far away in England. Aye, said Mr. Cole. Although it would have been a very good match, it is better for our family to stay together. We'll keep one another safe, come what may, no matter what happens, between the Loyalists and the Patriots.
The Lacys left the very next morning. As soon as their carriage pulled away, Elisabeth and Annabel set forth for the Merriman store. Elisabeth was anxious to tell Felicity what had happened, and Annabel said she wanted
to look for Buttons, but Elisabeth suspected she really wanted to look for Ben. Elisabeth was so happy and excited that she flew along the brisk cliff, her feet hardly touching the bumpy brick street. "Bitsy," huffed Annabel behind her. "Do slow down. Gracious, you're so bouncy." Elisabeth stopped short mid-bounce. She turned to look at Annabel and saw instantly that the friendly, grateful sister who'd spoken up to Miss Priscilla so sensibly the night before was gone, and Annabel Bananabel was back. Elisabeth sighed. She trudged toward Mr. Merriman's house with a heavy heart, keeping step with Annabel. Felicity practically danced with curiosity. Met Elisabeth and Annabel at the door. "Do tell," she said. "I saw the Lacey's carriage leave this morning. What happened?" Well, said Annabel grandly. "Thanks to me, all is well. Bitsy and I are going to stay here in Virginia." She craned her neck to look around the store. "Is Ben here?" she asked. "No, I am sorry he's not," said Felicity. "He's out making a delivery." Grumped Annabel. Then she flounced off to look at Buttons. When she was gone, Felicity said, "I am gladder than I can say that you are not going to England, Elisabeth. But I am confused. Did Annabel say both of you are staying here?" "Aye." Elisabeth nodded. "Aye," she sighed. "Annabel is not going to marry Lord Harry. They both wanted to end their engagement. So there is no disgrace in it, luckily for Annabel. And you and I are stuck with Annabel, I fear. And 'tis our own fault. We did rather do a fine job of cooling off Miss Priscilla. Now we are right back where we began, with annoying Annabel. Right back where we began is not such a bad place to be," said Felicity joyfully. She looked sideways at Elisabeth. "I happen to know that Ben is to make a delivery to your house later today. Shall we tell Annabel that Ben has heard that she is not going to marry Lord Harry?" Elisabeth caught on right away. "And so she is free to be courted," said Elisabeth, exuberant again. "Shall we tell Annabel that Ben is coming to call her?" "Oh, yes, let's," said Felicity. "That would be very funny, Elisabeth." And that ends Very Funny Elisabeth. Even though this was supposed to be Elisabeth's story, and she's definitely has more of a role in this than the Felicity books, I think this is more of an Annabel story. Like, the main plot doesn't really happen to Elisabeth. Like, Elisabeth isn't really involved until Miss Priscilla says anything about her going to England. The main plot is really more about Annabel than it is about Elisabeth. But I did enjoy reading this. It's a really fun book. I just feel like they made Felicity and Elisabeth maybe a little bit too more mischievous in this one. Like, they're growing up. Shouldn't they be less mischievous, not more mischievous? I don't know. It was fun to read. It wasn't, my problems with it aren't too severe. And for those of you who don't know, this was the book that you would have gotten when you bought the, Elisabeth doll. Also, worth noting, at the beginning, you may have noticed, they describe Elisabeth in this book with blonde hair. That was to match the doll and her depiction in the movie. Whereas in the old Felicity books that I read previously, they described her with dark hair. So, if you were curious about that, that's why. I wonder if they went back and rewrote that when they changed the illustration. I should hope so, because that would just be sloppy if they changed the illustrations to depict her as blonde, but didn't change her description to be blonde. But somebody who has newer copies of the Felicity books, let me know. Did they change Elisabeth's description to being blonde and blue-eyed instead of dark-eyed and dark-haired? Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this dramatic reading, and tomorrow we start the Josefina books. And just so you know, I only have 4 of the Josefina books. So I'm only going to be reading 3 of them because one of them is the Christmas book, and I already did it.